Monopolistic competition is our third scenario, and this is a fairly common one that we see all the time. And it's where there are many buyers and sellers. However, each firm makes a differentiated profit, so they're not a commodity. And furthermore, that competitors are free to enter and exit, unlike the monopoly condition. The key difference between the monopolistically competitive and perfect competition is that there's a slightly differentiated profit. And the implication is that there is incentive for firms to differentiate, and there are close substitutes, but there is a way to modify demand based on your actions. Here's the example of how the curves look for monopolistic competition. So in this case, we see demand, marginal revenue, marginal cost, average total cost. So the case here is this sloping line is the demand curve that we saw just previously for a monopoly. But in monopolistic competition, that's the part that bears the name monopolistic, because you do face a demand curve that's downward sloping. It's not a supply and demand derived single price. You have some control because your product has been differentiated from the commodity product. So therefore, you guess what? Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. You take your marginal cost compared to your marginal revenue, that sets the Q. The Q then translates up to demand to set the price. And that's how price is set in monopolistically competitive. Now, so far that looks just like a monopoly. Here's the difference. Because it's not a monopoly, there are others that see this and they could react. And there could be entry by competitors and close substitutes. The profit under the scenario is price minus average total cost. Here's the average total cost at this point. Price gets to this point. So this box here represents profit. Very similar again to monopolies. But in this case, notice that there is no barrier to entry. So other competitors can see this profit, and if they have a favorable cost position, they can enter the market and start taking away some of your business, some of your demand. Profit maximization for monopolistic competition is that we will look at marginal revenue, marginal costs, like a monopoly would. And then the price is where we translate up to the demand curve, and the profit maximizing output then is MR equals MC, and that Q then determines the price of P. Again, we're making the price because we're a bit of a mini monopoly, but they're short-lived, which we'll see very soon. So in the long run, what happens? Since there is competition that could enter, the long-run equilibrium has more dynamics to it. The firm has this base case, which we just saw. We set the Q, then that sets the price. But when there's an entry, someone will come in to take some of that demand. Therefore, we start seeing a different demand curve because we had entry. The different demand curve would then lead to a different marginal revenue curve, which then leads to a different product price and quantity. Your quantity drops to now the reality of the new price, and then that causes the price to change, also drop, and that leads to a new equilibrium for you. In the long run, it stabilizes where the industry has such competition that has entered, so the average total cost equals the revenue, and that is the long run equilibrium, where ATC equals the demand and the price then there's no incentive for entry, because in this case, no one else has a better cost curve, so the industry has already hit zero profit because price minus average total cost is zero, so there's no incentive to enter or exit. The long run in monopolistic competition is such that the level of output is going to end up where the price is greater than marginal cost, and the price is going to be set based on the average total cost for all of the competitors. So in this case, it's not quite like a monopoly, because there is this slightly competitive aspect where we can be kept honest, and it's not a perfectly competitive because a firm does have some control over their price because of their differentiation. Implications for product differentiation is pretty significant, because if you're in this monopolistic competitive market, you have to continually improve and differentiate your product so consumers will continue to buy your product and not another. So it leads to a fair amount of competitive action and innovation. Implications are, how would you do this? You could do it by advertising, by showing the differences to the consumer to create that differentiation, a one that's based on ads. The second is you could do niche marketing, where you could create products that expand the interest of your product because it's been tailored to the needs of a particular segment. An example is green marketing, where we have cleaning products, and now there's a new line of cleaning products that are biodegradable. And that would be an example of niche compared to one where it's a consumer advertising base, where you're creating a brand, right? We're selling a positioning. So successful managers may feel that they have an advantage, and that's what we call brand myopic, where we rest on our laurels in the past, and therefore we miss the edge that we need to maintain to continually differentiate our products versus the other offerings. The optimal advertising decisions can be made by looking at, well, what is the nature of the elasticity based on advertising compared to the elasticity based on pricing? And here we can see the relationship of the advertising to sales ratio should equal the elasticity for advertising divided by the negative elasticity for pricing. It's negative because it's a negative relationship. So we look at that ratio, and that will set the amount of ads versus the amount we do via price competition. So back to McDonald's. So we've known enough now to know the answer to this question. Do you know the answer? Yes, McDonald's is in the fast food business, and they are monopolistically competitive. It's not the same burger or French fry that you get in every fast food, so therefore there is some differentiation. McCafe was because McDonald's saw an opportunity to again differentiate its traditional rivals like Burger King and Wendy's, Jack in the Box, etc. And they also saw that they are tromping in the turf of another known player, Starbucks, and something in between, Dunkin' Donuts. So by entering the coffee industry with more offerings, they are differentiating against traditional competitors and taking away some market share from other competitors that before were not head on. What was the result? The net result is they had a short-term increase in sales, as we saw in the article, tripling. That's pretty decent. And their market share also took a spike. Now, in the long run, differentiation will dissipate because others will react. In this example, you can't quite see the picture as clearly here, but Burger King reacted with their own line of coffee, and Starbucks reacted by adding more food items. So we're seeing that differentiation by one competitor leads to reaction and response from other competitors. So pretty clear example of a monopolistically competitive market. So summarizing our learning objectives for Chapter 8, we saw some generalizable ideas such as the marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That holds for all three of the scenarios that we've seen. That the profit equals the price minus the average total cost times the quantity sold. And that there's incentive for entry if the entrant has marginal revenue greater than the marginal cost. So they'll be tempted to enter and make some profit. And in only perfect competition will we see maximum social benefit, because in that condition, the optimal production is made that increases the quantity and lowers the price, which creates consumer value and producer surplus. In a perfectly competitive market, we saw the characteristics, how to make decisions on quantity and price, and how that would then lead to entry and exit of firms. Then we looked at monopolies. Same thing. What are their characteristics? Where do they get their power? And how do they set the quantity and then price to maximize their profits? We also looked at a variant, including multi-plant, and how and why they can maintain this over a long run. And finally, we looked at monopolistically competitive and saw their characteristics and how firms in this type of industry react, primarily through differentiation, in order to create some additional differentiation, leading to more sales, leading to more profit opportunity. However, since it is a competitive market, whatever innovations you have will be quickly reacted to by your competitors or potentially even new entrants. So that finishes Chapter 8. Next, Chapter 9 is dedicated to one of the more interesting scenarios for an industry type, and that's the oligopoly. So stay tuned.